Welcome to the Stoic Bodywork podcast, where we focus on balancing the body, opening the mind, and awakening the spirit. I'm Octavia, your co-host. Just a quick reminder, all the information shared here is for general informational purposes only and isn't intended as professional, medical, or legal advice. All right, let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of the Stoic Bodywork podcast. As always, my name is Phil, the host and creator of the podcast. I'm the owner of Stoic Bodywork, and I have a list of questions. Last episode, we did the first part of the list. We got all the way up to, I believe, question 31 is where we left off. This is our next section of questions, and this one all has to do with pain functions and how the body responds to pain and things like that. So we're just going to jump right on in. Let's grab Octavia here. Hi, Octavia. Can you give me question 31, please?
Question 31. What is the difference between structural pain and neurological pain, and why does it matter for treatment?
So structural pain and neurological pain, the words there are, the key is structural and neurological. So structural pain is pain that's going to have to be around the skeletal muscular system, and neurological obviously has to do with the nerves. Now, in my personal opinion, the human system uses pain sensations differently. And so I classify them as a language. To me, pain is a language from the body to us. And we often just don't learn the way that language works. There's rules to that language. I clarify quite often in my practice with my clientele, and even outside my practice when I'm working with people that have curiosity around these things. Sharp, stabby, dull, achy, burny, and sore and tender. Sharp and stabby is typically neurological pain. That is pain that's something that's happening to the neurological system that it doesn't like. And so it creates that sharp, stabby sensation. Sometimes you'll also get like zingy or electrical. That can also be neurological. And then we have dull, achy, and burny. Typically, dull, achy, and burny is on that structural side. It's on the skeletal side. Dull, achy, and burny sensations are typically a bone that don't like the way something is being acted upon it, or the way it's being acted upon by something, or in the where it's seated, essentially, or how it's rotating, or it's all about like joint pain and also the bone itself. But the bone is doing that signaling, in my personal opinion. And then we have sore and tender, that's muscular. So on the structural side, we have dull, achy, burny, sore and tender. And then on the neurological side, we have sharp, stabby, maybe zingy, electrical, some of those. And so the difference between them is what is being acted upon and what the body is trying to tell us. The reason that matters for treatment is to know what we're going to do with it. So if it is on the dull, achy, burny side and it's on the bone side, a chiropractor might have to deal with that. But in therapeutic bodywork, I might be trying to get that bone into a better position or get things to stop acting on that bone. Now, chiropractic does high velocity adjustments, HVAs. High velocity adjustments is something you have to be licensed for a chiropractor to do. But a lot of people, have cracks and stuff like that. So if something cracks, that's not necessarily a high velocity adjustment. If you just adjust your finger, not necessarily a high velocity adjustment, or if you get out of bed in the morning, your shoulders crack or pop. So I'm not attempting to do this, but often there'll be an adjustment. After the client gets off the table, they move, they do like a squat or something like that, and we'll have an adjustment. Just, the air releasing from the joint. That tells us that things were being acted upon, and the muscular and structure, the musculoskeletal system was trying to pull the skeletal system into a certain way. We know that if you have dull, achy, burny, you probably want to see a chiropractor if we think it's bone related, or start on the musculoskeletal side to see if we can help with that. On the sharp, stabby, zingy, electrical on that side, or also what's known as inferred pain, so pain that starts in one place and ends in another. We're going to get into trigger points much later in this conversation, but trigger points often do that. That is on the neurological side, and sometimes we might need to see an acupuncturist or, up it to looking at if it's a entrapment or impingement. Entrapment and impingement is when the nerve is stuck in between two structures. Entrapment, I always get these backwards. I apologize. And I don't really feel like looking it up right now because I'm being lazy because we have a lot of questions to get through. Entrapment is when it's stuck between a a muscle and a bone structure, and an impingement is when it's stuck between two bone structures. So whatever's trapping it, that classifies entrapment versus impingement. So the reason that the pain sensation, structural or neurological, matter is because it informs how we're going to treat and maybe where we need to escalate to. So on the bodywork, on the therapeutic bodywork side, it's informing the subjective. It's the subjective information. What type of pain sensations? We always need to be qualifying our clientele's pain, or you need to be, qualifying your pain. One thing I tell my clients all the time, like, if you're having pain sensations, don't wait to try to tell me that when you come in. Text it to yourself, write it down so you have that data because it happens in the moment. And then you can bring that information with you during the appointment, because that type of pain sensation really does matter as far as structural, neurological, or just telling us like what might actually be happening. Let's get to the next one here. Octavia, question 32.
Question 32. How does the nervous system perpetuate pain long after an injury has healed?
The neurological system, if is that long after the injury is healed. So the neurological system might be dealing with scar tissue. It might be dealing, now there's complete and entire syndromes based on this. So there's phantom limb syndrome. There is phantom pain syndrome, where the neurological system is still sending the pain signal. That could be because the nerve ending was damaged. Now, when you damage nerve tissue, it takes a really long time to, I'll say reprogram, but to heal first, and then to get back into alignment with the rest of the system. This is the closest thing I can explain this to you is when something falls asleep, right? If your hand falls asleep, or your arm falls asleep, or legs specifically, your legs is a big one. If you have a limb that falls asleep and you get that, like, they call it like the tingly, the pins and needles feeling, that's the neurological system getting reinnervated and connecting back to the system, because you've essentially starved it of blood oxygen, and then it kind of shut off, and now it's rewiring and reconnecting. And so you're getting all that tingliness and the feelings there. Same thing with inferred pain. So the neurological system might still be sending those pain signals, that if it hasn't gotten an updated program, maybe the fascial system, which is what I deal with the most. We talked about that last episode. Maybe the fascial system still has it entrapped somehow. So maybe there's still an impingement. Maybe it's been damaged in some way. So even though the injury's healed, right? So you cut your finger or something like that, you can still have neurological pain that persists afterwards. And that's because that nerve ending takes a while to heal, or something is still acting upon it that it doesn't like. That's where we get the dull, achy, burny from the bone system. Now, remember, all pain sensations travel through the neurological system. That's why the first question there was about, like, where is the pain sensation originating from? Because that's really important to how we're going to treat something. This question is, even though we treated it, you might still have pain sensation. Sore and tender, right? That's happens after a workout. The tissue is still healing. Inflammation is another big part of this. I'm going to get into inflammation probably in a couple of these different questions here, but because inflammation has a lot to do with our pain sensations. But on that side of things, the pain sensations and the inflammation is what matters the most, post, quote unquote, solving or healing the injury, because you might not be completely healed, as well as like our subjective understanding of healing. Think about when you cut your finger, going back to that, the tissue heals, but the internal tissue hasn't healed yet, right? The external, we want to, we're pressurized systems. We want to stop that bleeding first, and then we want to patch up the pressurization system. We want to put the skin back together so we stay nice and pressurized and everything works correctly. Well, just because the surface layer tissue is healed doesn't mean the underneath tissue is healed. This is where like muscle tears and bone breaks and these things take a while to heal, and everyone's healing rate is a little bit different. So that's probably the best way to answer that is the nervous system will perpetuate pain long after the injury is quote unquote healed. Not only for that reason, but also to, I guess I should add this in, it might still think you're in danger. We might have healed the tissue, but the originating issue might not be resolved yet. So it's still going to send that pain signal. This is what happens when you have like golfer's elbow or tennis elbow, quote unquote, which is medial or lateral epicondylitis. So condylitis, the condyle, the elbow itself, the joint, medial, lateral, inside, outside, and then itis, inflammations. We have inflammation of the medial or lateral condyle, and everything's in Latin usually. That's how you break all this down. that inflammation set is going to cause irritation, and that irritation, even though we get rid of the irritation, like what might be like the general damage that's happened, we clear up the inflammation, the pain sensation might continue because it wasn't just the medial lateral epicondylitis. It was some subluxation of the shoulder that the elbow was compensating for, or maybe at the wrist. And so that pain sensation keeps on happening because you're still aggravating it. And the system's trying to tell you, like, please stop. This is a problem. I'll probably jump into it in another part of these questions, but the pain system is really important. It tells us a lot of things. There's another syndrome where someone doesn't get pain syndrome. And a lot of people come in, I forget what that syndrome's called, but a lot of people come into my practice and they have really high, quote unquote, pain tolerances. Sometimes that can be a detriment, especially for young kids, where they're in pain, but because their pain tolerance is so high, they didn't realize that something bad was going to happen to that joint, or, something catastrophic can happen to the system. Because the pain sensations were starting, but their pain tolerance was too high, and they didn't get the signal of like, oh, hey, you need to slow down. Or some people just never even learn that. A lot of people just keep pushing through pain like it's the right answer. Don't do that. That's not the right answer. We're in charge of our human system. We are in charge of this physical form. We are its management team. We are its control structure. We don't necessarily own it, but we like to think that like we do. But it's a whole system, and one of its languages is pain. And if you don't listen to that language, you're probably causing it harm, and that's not your job. Your job isn't to cause your body harm. Now, okay, we'll get into the semantics of like, oh, what about training and that causing that harm? Permanent damage, right? Which is typically avoidable as long as we listen to the pain signals ahead of time. So it's not always best to push through pain. And the whole no pain, no gain thing, there's levels to all this. So yeah, pain is a language. Probably best to get into more of these questions here, but you can see how this is like a really important topic. And, I have a feeling one of these I might go off on. We'll see. Next question, please.
Question 33. What is central sensitization, and how often do you encounter it?
This one's tough because I don't know if anyone has ever really honestly come in and say, hey, I have central sensitization. So let's start with that. Central sensitization is when the central nervous system, that's what they mean by central sensitization, so central nervous system sensitization, over sensitivity in the central nervous system. This can present as all different things. And honestly, we're getting into much more medical here than, you would have to see sometimes a pain specialist will diagnose this. Sometimes it's a neurologist. But central sensitization is when the central nervous system is overactive and highly attuned to pain sensations. And so this is that level of, this is like one of the extremes of no pain tolerance. So everything is kind of sending a sensation. Cortisol cascades can happen at that level. So this is more of a medical one. I can't say I've encountered it all that often as like someone who came in and said, hey, I have this diagnosis. I see it as a varying degree. Now, there's tests for all this, but I see a varying degree of pain tolerance and sensitivity. So these are two different things. Pain tolerance is your reaction to the pain structure. And so pain tolerance can be either innate or you can learn it over time. Zazen meditation is all about, controlling pain tolerance, sitting in, Zazen position, the crossing the eyes, staring at a wall. Some Qigong practices that way. These are all meditative practices in that sense. That is to build up pain tolerance. Conditioning, martial arts do a lot of conditioning. I did a lot of the iron body skills, bashing our arms and like grinding stuff. And we do this in conditioning with just athletes as far as, quote unquote conditioning when you're doing what it's really actually VO2 maxing, right? Stressing the lung tissue or doing body weight exercises to failure, conditioning that way. For volleyball, we used to do dive drills. So that was a conditioning set, like getting used to your chest literally bouncing off the floor, or diving drills where you're like literally sliding on the floor and stuff like that. In, contact sports, they're getting hit regularly. Field hockey, that's a whole conditioning thing, just playing the game because of the stick position. So we have it as far as the regular activity, the function of the activity, conditioning, quote unquote. This is inbuilt to the system that if we do something regularly, it will get prepared to deal with that. And so your tolerance goes up. You know, the mechanic turning a wrench, or even the office worker sitting in the office chair. All of those are a way to increase pain tolerance, whereas you do have some innate sensation. Some people just have, you know, really high pain tolerance, quote unquote. That's an innate ability comparatively to a trained ability. And so when we talk about central sensitization, that's going to be on the clinical diagnosis side. I'm going to be more on like, I see it as a varying degree. And I'm certain that there's been someone along the lines. I've had some people who are like ultra sensitive, and we have to use the quote unquote light. I shouldn't say quote unquote so many times, but the light touch modalities, right? So we're using light pressures. I do not believe in heavy pressure gets you like that no pain, no gain thing. A practitioner, specifically a therapeutic body worker, needs to know how to use the correct pressure through palpation to work on the tissue that we're trying to work on. Just adding pressure to the system is going to have an adverse reaction where the body just goes, whoa, 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 whoa. You're an outside threat now. I don't want to do what you're asking me to do, which is relax and alleviate a fascial situation. I'm going to defend against this. In martial arts, we used to say, like, if you really want to be a good grappler, you get the other person's body to wear you like an article of clothing. Like, when was the last time you thought about your shirt or your pants or your shoes, right? The foot feels the foot when it touches the ground. That was another thing that used to get thrown around a lot. That's a Chan meditation, or a Zen meditation. Also, it's one of the, just kind of like something you throw out at people, make you think about things. If I'm doing my job correctly, that person's body will respond knowing that I'm not trying to harm it. I'm trying to help it. I'm trying to remind it, hey, spend resources here, do this. So, sorry, this is getting a little far afield. Central sensitization is an actual issue that is typically diagnosed. Have I had someone come in and mention it? Not that I can think of in my practice. I've had people who suspected, but I wouldn't make that diagnosis. I'm not a medical professional, not medical or professional advice. I don't diagnose or prescribe in any way. But if, you know, there might be an underlying neurological condition that leads to that too. So, yeah, let's move on to the next one. This all has to do with that. Like there's a lot of varying degrees to things, but the pain sensation tells us a lot. Pain tells us a lot about a lot of things. Next question, please.
Question 34. How does proprioception factor into injury, movement dysfunction, and recovery?
All right, here's another one where you have to buckle up, kids, because this is going to be long-winded. This whole question set is going to be much longer than probably the ones I did before this. All right, so proprioception, let's break that down. Proprioception, the easiest way to think about this I found is if you think about a dial from 0 to 10. 0 is completely relaxed. 10 is that muscle is contracting as hard as it possibly can, doing the eccentric action. We're never at a 0. We're never at a 10 unless there's an adrenal cortex response or loss of blood flow and the limb literally can't move. No ATP, no function. So let's think about that dial from 0 to 10. If we're thinking about a bicep curl, if you extend your arm, your palm away from your face, and then you bring your palm towards your face, that is the dial. 0 all the way out should be quote unquote all the way relaxed. 10 should be by the face, quote unquote, full contraction of the muscle. Proprioception is that dial, 0 to 10. What is the length and volumetric control of the muscle? Now, here's the key to proprioception. It has 2 pieces. That's where everybody gets a little lost and things go a little awry. Mobility is the flexibility or range of muscle. That'll confuse everybody. Mobility is the range of motion of the joint. Flexibility is the range of motion of the muscle itself. So when we're talking about proprioception, we're talking about flexibility of the muscle. Proprioception controls mobility, range of motion of the joint. If I have bad proprioception, quote unquote, bad flexibility, you're going to hear quote unquote in this episode a lot, I'm sorry. That flexibility is also going to control the range of motion of the muscle, the mobility. So the joint may feel stiff. And now if the flexibility is resolved, the joint still might be stiff because it's controlled by multiple muscle groups. Every joint in the body has multiple muscle groups that control it. If I resolve proprioception flexibility issues in a muscle or muscle group, I'm only controlling one piece, acentric, eccentric, tertiary, or secondary action. And so the proprioception might not fix the range of motion of the joint itself, but it will help with the range of motion of the muscle. Mobility and flexibility, proprioception make up strength coefficients. The length and volume of a muscle is directly correspondent to the strength and contraction of the muscle, unless the Golgi tendon organ, this little tiny grain of rice-sized thing at the tendinal attachment sites of the bone, this is where it gets into the mobility side, unless that Golgi tendon organ says, hey, I don't think you should be able to pull as hard as you're pulling, or I've miscalculated how hard you are pulling on the tendon, which is pulling on the bone, and stops that flexibility side. So it says, instead of that dial from 0 to 10, again, never 0, never 10, but like maybe like a 1 to a 9, it sets the dial to 5 and says that's your new 0. And so until you reset that, the proprioception continues to cause dysfunction. It'll factor in injury, movement, dysfunction, and recovery. So you can recover from an injury, but the proprioception might still be bad. And so you go to train and you're not able to train the way you want. You keep running into barriers. I'm going to say this now in this episode because I'm probably going to cover it later, but I think now is a great time to put this out. Proprioception is the piece everyone gets wrong when it comes to injury recovery because they skip it. They skip it and they move on to strengthening. And strengthening is limited by proprioception. The length and volume of the muscle is directly correspondent to the strength coefficients of the muscle. If the proprioception of the muscle is bad and that Golgi tendon organ is limiting the range of motion flexibility side of the muscle, starting the dial at 4 or 5 and only letting it go to 7 or 8, we have a shortened length. So you're in contraction and you're not able to contract fully. So let's think about an eccentric action in which we see this outside of muscles, a rubber band. If I stretch the rubber band and then stretch it from that point only, I only have so much range of motion in that rubber band. And so I'm losing strength coefficient of the rubber band. The longer you stretch a rubber band, the greater reaction of when you let it go. But the more you leave it in that stretched position, actually the weaker the force becomes. It has to do with physics, physics. But in the muscle groups, if the muscle only thinks that it can contract from that 4 or 5 to that 7, 8, that's as much of its squeezy power that it has. That's as much as it gets. And if that is in its weak range of motion or its strong range of motion, you might get a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger out of it, but you're not getting full contraction. So full lengthening and contraction, full eccentric and eccentric action, which means you're only training the little bit that muscle can do. So it ultimately limits the amount of strength you can train after injury recovery. So if you skip two things known as balance and stabilization, you'll not be in a great place. And if you skip one of the first two other things, now this is assuming we've gotten out of acute care, because that is the first step to all injury recovery, right? Acute care, acute care is whatever we have to do for that injury. If it's a dislocation, if it's a cut, if it's a laceration, if it's a compression, if it's a fracture, if it's whatever we have to do to get that acute care, your body's trending towards homeostasis and is healing. Then we have this thing called desensitization. So let me just break it down this way. So we put it in this episode right here, right now. The 5 steps to all injury recovery are acute care, desensitization, stabilization, balance, and then strengthening. It has to go in that order. If it doesn't go in that order, you will be in the revolving door that all PTs find their clients in at some point where they're not getting anywhere, or you'll be in the revolving door of a person who's quote unquote recovered and goes back to your training set and gets stuck and keeps hitting a wall. This gets back into the neurological stuff. I think we get into the questions here later that I'll put this all together a little bit more. But acute care, desensitization, balance and stabilization, and then strengthening. Now, balance and stabilization, typically we want to do balance first to check stabilization and then strengthen stabilization, but sometimes that has to be flipped. So those are the two that actually can be flip-flopped, because balance is on the proprioception side, stabilization, I'm sorry, other way around. I always get this backwards. Balance is on the mobility side. Stabilization is actually on the flexibility side. The muscles stabilize the joint. So if the joint has poor mobility, they might be overstabilized, which means then we have to desensitize the Golgi tendon organ to allow the muscles to loosen so we get a proper contraction. This is all getting pretty deep on this one. So let me go back over the question for you. No, for me, really. How does proprioception factor into injury, movement, dysfunction, and recovery? It's the key. It's the key piece. You got to figure out the proprioception or you're not going to get the outcome you're looking for. So again, proprioception is controlled by the Golgi tendon organ. It's the contraction and lengthening of the muscle. The mobility is on the range of motion of the joint. The flexibility is the range of motion of the muscle itself, the muscle groups. They act in conjunction to cause sensitivity, which removes both mobility and flexibility. And so you can usually target one or the other to get a better result in the other one. And then that controls the ability to re-strengthen. So acute care, desensitization, balance stabilization, strengthening, all have to do with getting the sensitivity out of that proprioception issue and then being able to move forward with the rest of the recovery. If there can still be dysfunction well after the injury recovery has occurred, because the proprioception has never really been addressed. It got a little bit better, got a little bit better. We see this in proximal hamstring tendinopathy all the time. Proximal hamstring tendinopathy, the Golgi tendon organ, is the thing that needs to get desensitized. We see it in disc issues in the lower back, spinal column issues. We see it in pulled or strained muscles. So a pulled muscle is one thing, a strained muscle is another thing. They're levels. We see it in ankle sprains, right? A sprain is before a strain or a tear, strain, sprain, tear. So there's different levels of all these things that a lot of people just never learn the vernacular behind, which is one of the most important things, having the vocabulary. But proprioception, if you're in the industry, you better learn what proprioception is and how to address it, because that is what's limiting a lot of direct care. It's just, you got to resolve that to get a better outcome. Let's get our next question here. Next question, please.
Question 35. What is the role of the autonomic nervous system in chronic tension and pain?
The autonomic nervous system. So let's go back. We talked about centralized sensitivity. We have the central nervous system, which is broken up into two pieces: the autonomic nervous system and the I'm going to blank now. I always do this. Central nervous system, autonomic, and I'm gonna have to get Octavia to help me out here. Octavia, central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and what's the other side of the nervous system?
The other major part is the somatic nervous system. It handles voluntary control of muscles and sensory information.
No, we have the central nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system, and we have fight or flight, rest, digest. Which is which?
Fight or flight is governed by the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, while rest and digest is managed by the parasympathetic branch.
All right, so we have the central nervous system, which we talked about a little bit earlier with the central sensitization. Now, central nervous system, we have a couple pieces. So we have the autonomic nervous system, which has two separations: parasympathetic and sympathetic. The autonomous nervous system is automatic. So that's what it means by autonomous. The autonomic autonomy. That's the things you can't control. So good luck trying to control your heartbeat. Good luck trying to control your digestion. You can do things that affect it, right? You can run or you can eat something, and that'll affect those systems in the body. But typically, how this all works is there's things that you can kind of directly control, right? So we have motor function, part of the central nervous system. We can do motor function, kinesthetic. We can't say like heartbeat, beat. If you have that ability, please come out to the world now and tell us, because that would make some fascinating research. So we have the autonomous nervous system, and it's built into two pieces: sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is essentially your rest, digest, and sympathetic is your fight or flight. Parasympathetic is your rest, digest. So sympathetic, you can think of it as being sympathetic towards something. So if I'm sympathetic towards something, I'm reacting to it. It's something that is for me to react to. So that's our fight or flight. So we're being sympathetic of the situation and we're seeing things. So fight or flight, fight or flight. Parasympathetic, so next to sympathetic, is or side a tangent to. That's your rest, digest. That's like just sitting around chilling. Just, I'm going to digest. I'm going to relax, maybe take a nap. So that's the major difference there. So we have parasympathetic, sympathetic. That's part of the autonomous nervous system. So now that we got that part out of the way, autonomic nervous system and chronic tension and pain. So we think about parasympathetic, sympathetic. If your body is in sympathetic nervous system mode, you're stressed. You are fight or flight. You are, what's going on? What do I do? Right? So we want to get you into parasympathetic if we want you to control that. If you're stressed, your cortisol levels are very high usually. As your cortisol levels raise, eventually you hit this thing called cortisol cascade, which means your cortisol levels drop. Here's a bombshell a lot of people don't know. You need cortisol to survive. Without cortisol, you are not doing well. In fact, your body is actually freaking out even more than if it did have a bunch of cortisol. We have I'll break it down to four. We have four major hormones that control the endocrine system. That is your norepinephrine, which typically people call adrenaline, cortisol, serotonin, and dopamine. So barring the norepinephrine drive of like, yeah, let's go, serotonin, dopamine, cortisol. Serotonin, mood stabilization, regulation. Dopamine is your reward chemical, like, hey, good job, human. Here's some feel good. So, serotonin, mood stable, dopamine, reward, euphoric, serotonin, stable. So like calm, collected, like, oh yeah, but like serendipitous, like, oh, nice. This is nice. This is good. Cortisol, stress, melancholy. So when serotonin rises, typically cortisol will come up a little bit. But we see this, and then dopamine comes up. As dopamine really rises, cortisol comes even more, because as cortisol comes up, then serotonin has to come up. There's some cool mapping out there you can look at about how the endocrine system, those four major chemicals, are our moods, essentially. That's how our emotional states fluctuate. So with the autonomic nervous system being in control of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, if we're in that fight or flight stress mode, cortisol level going up, we're going to be seeking out dopamine to try to combat that cortisol. So we have addictive personality issues. We have addiction, which is just addiction to dopamine. Because as our dopamine creeps up to match that cortisol, then we need higher levels of dopamine to get that cortisol back down, to get the serotonin to come back up. So that's the addictive. Everyone's addicted to dopamine. Some addictions are based on, remember, I'm not a medical professional. Some addictions are based on a substance that provides that dopamine. So you could be addicted to working out. It's probably a good addiction, but you can overdo that. You can also be addicted to alcohol and overdo that. Obviously, that can lead to death very easily. So this is where the addiction is to dopamine. We are all addicted to dopamine as the reward chemical, for the very reason that if you give the system sugar, you've given it a lot of calories. The system loves calories. The human system's like, oh, calories, I can do stuff. And I can readily use this sugar stuff. This is amazing. I can turn this into energy right away. Glucose. It gives you dopamine for that. So you go out and you're like, ooh, chocolate bar. Ooh, candy. That's why. Same thing for breads and carbs and stuff like that. Same thing. This is why people get cravings. So we are addicted to dopamine. Dopamine is the reward chemical our bodies. Remember, here's that another piece of that conversation, right? We had the pain conversation, and we're talking about in this section of questions. Well, another part of that conversation is these chemicals, one of which is like, hey, kid, here's some dopamine for doing something I really thought was good. Well, we found out that the human system will just continue to be like, yes, here's more dopamine, you stupid brain, because I want these things. It's a combative force back and forth. We got to rein ourselves in. This is why the mental health side of things is so important. These are separate health bodies. There's a physical body that is just trying to live, trying to react, trying to manage all its different pieces and functions and all this craziness that's going on. Just think about gravity. It's got to deal with gravity from day one. It's like, oh, what is this external force that I need, but also is like tough to deal with. And then we grow and we get bigger and we're like, oh man, this is so much work to continue to move this. I'm 270 pounds, 285 pounds. I fluctuate back and forth now and then. I'm a little upset. I'm only down to 270 right now, but, my body's got to move me around all the time. That is a struggle. That thing needs some calories. It needs some protein. It's got to fix some things, lift heavy stuff, right? So it rewards me when I give it protein. It rewards me with dopamine when I give it calories. It rewards me with dopamine when it does something that it likes. And then my other part of my system goes like, oh, well, that was a lot of dopamine, but he's going to crash when the dopamine goes away. So I better bring this thing called serotonin up to help fight that off and make him just feel content, make him feel like, oh yeah, good job, buddy. Like, here's your reward. You feel great, euphoric. Woo. If we miss the serotonin regulation, crash, cortisol, right? And then we get stressed. And then we also get like melancholic. And this happens typically after elation, also known as like the vacation hangover. I'm sure a lot of people have felt that before. Or the fear of missing out, the FOMO, like, oh, but dopamine, like, oh, I didn't get it. Oh no, cortisol crushes the dopamine, and then now we're stressed, and then serotonin doesn't come up to rise it because you actually didn't get the reward. So the endocrine system controls this. Norepinephrine, that's the other driver that makes things happen, in the fight or flight state. So on the sympathetic side, if we need to move, norepinephrine. If we need to freeze, still norepinephrine. That's your heart rate gets up. Because you need that heart rate increase to get all that information. This is just an information aggregation process. So the parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system, part of the autonomic nervous system, is what makes all of that super important. So chronic tension and pain. I didn't think I was going to make it back to these are some long questions, huh? Chronic tension and pain. If we're in chronic tension, we're in that fight or flight state on the sympathetic nervous side. So we need to do something for the autonomic nervous system. A DRS response using cranial sacral is a great option here. A deep relaxive state, getting down into that deep theta brainwave state, maybe even delta brainwave state. I'm going to get into it later in this conversation because I actually read one of the questions earlier that I was like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to say for that one. Is sleep. So when you hear the question, maybe you can guess which one I'm going to say sleep for. So when we sleep, DRS response, deep relaxive state, non-REM sleep, that deep restorative sleep, that resets the autonomic nervous system too. This one, a lot of people may have never seen, but if you ask around enough, or if you look at some stories, you might find this. If someone's like lacking sleep and they're just at it, they're just going, things are super stressed, and they have that like breakdown and they just sleep for like 16 to like 20 some hours. That's a hard reset DRS response to have their neurological system fix the problem. That's what they're doing. They're like, too much cortisol, too much serotonin, too much dopamine, too much everything. We need to come back to baseline. We're going to just knock you out. We're going to put you down. That's what the body will do to you. That's what the nervous system will do. So the role of the autonomic nervous system in chronic tension and pain is to control the hormonal structure and to send the information, and also precursor leading up to a lot of major pain episodes. I haven't gotten into it in this one. We might get into it a little bit later, but inflammation plays a huge role into how the autonomic nervous system presents itself there. So let's forgive the interruption of the episode, but I have a couple things I really want to tell you about. One is Stoic Sleep. I created Stoic Sleep to help get to sleep and to get better recovery out of my sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things we do when it comes to health and wellness. Number one performance drug, and also the only time we do oxidative stress repair, specifically at the DNA and RNA levels. So if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. And if you're not healing, you can't gain all of the awesome things you do from training. So I tested it for a year and I've now released it to the public. Thank you, Pure Bulk, as the manufacturer, for making that possible. Grab a jar at stoicbodywork.com/stoic sleep today. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I take it every night and I love it. So get some great sleep. Grab a jar of Stoic Sleep. Let's get into the next one. Next question, please.
Question 36. Why do so many people have hip flexor issues, and what is actually happening structurally?
We're machines. All right. And if you don't maintain the machine, it doesn't do well. Now, we're also machines. So let's think about what happens on a machine that's moving. The parts that move the most wear the fastest. This is honestly, like, people want to put it out there that it's sitting and it's this thing or the other thing. Yeah, okay, sit on your sits bones. Make sure your spine is being propped up correctly. Make sure your lumbar spine is in a proper seated position. You have lumbar support. But if I'm being honest, the thing we do the most, or a lot of people do the most throughout their life, is walk, move, lift, right? The biggest muscle groups act on the joint that is the femoral head into the hip socket. Now, here's a big thing, talking on the therapeutic bodywork side, for any therapeutic bodyworkers out there, or anyone who's suffering from hip pain and dysfunction. There's a lot of pieces to this equation that we really have to keep in mind here, which is another part of this answer. Femurs are femurs and hips are hips. They are separate structure. The leg is not a part of the hip. The femur head, the greater concentra of the femur, sits in the capsule for the hip socket. That doesn't make it the hip. The hip bones, the ilium and the iliacus, and the joints that are around there as well, sacroiliac joint, pubic symphysis in the front, right? There's other joint structures that are also acting as quote unquote part of the hips. We often just say, like, oh, my hip. Well, actually, it's the greater concentra of the femur, or the socket, or the ilium iliacus. Maybe it's the sacrum. There's other parts in that hip structure. So when we talk about pelvic floor, there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's so many muscle attachments. Don't quote me on the exact number here. I'm just going to throw one out at you. I think there's like 32 different muscle sets on either side. So 64 total. Again, it's just around. I'm just picking like a number that's probably close. There's so many different muscles there. We have gluteal maximus minimus, gluteal maximus medius minimus. We have piriformis. We have gracilis. We have all the hamstrings. We have all the quadriceps. We have all these muscles passing over this one joint that we quote unquote call the hip, but it's not. It's the hip socket and the femur, which make the joint. So it's a ball and socket joint, which is another one. Ball and socket joints. Right, they have a lot of different articulation pattern, and they have hard end zones. They only go so far. Unlike so hinge joints, right? Your elbow, and we have ball and socket. And here's the other major difference: is people want to think their shoulders and their ball and socket joint for their hips is the same thing. Well, the femur ball and socket joint is an actual ball and socket. It's a ball that sits inside of a socket. Our humerus is just hanging off. It's technically ball and socket joint, but the socket is much different. The AC joint is much different than the iliotibial area. Like, that's the other thing. Like, as far as structural wise, we have the iliotibial band, your IT band, right? That goes out and controls keeping the femur from like flying outward. But there's also a bunch of little muscles in there, don't ask me to name them, that do the same thing our AC rotator cuff joint muscles do. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. And so I think that's why hips, they wear out a lot, but it's really could be ball and socket joint issue, could be labral. It could be any one of the muscle groups in there. It could be overactivation of one of the muscle groups. They're also so those muscle groups is a conjoining factor of the sagittal plane, the mid-sagittal plane, actually. So if you draw a line directly across the top of the hip line there, that's where all the interchange happens. So we have the, superficial back line, superficial front line. Well, in the fascial lines, the superficial front line transfers across what's known as the stockocoxal exchange. So it goes down through the abdominal wall and then actually branches out into the psoases, which head out to the femoral line and then go down through the quadriceps. Well, that stockocoxal exchange is actually through part of the deep core line because it has to go through the front, but also through the socket, through the magnum foramen, and some of the opening there to get into the deeper tissue. Magnum foramen. Wait, that's on the back line. I forget. It's the stockocoxal exchange. I just said it. So the tissue has to kind of quote unquote jump. It's not almost like a perfect line, but we also have like a bunch of aponeurosis there. That's why we say don't hit below the belt because you don't have any muscles there. That's just an aponeurosis. That's just a myelin sheath. That's just a fascial sheath there. So we have that planal line of fascia. Then we have the superficial back line. We have the cross-lateral lines. We have the transverse. We have axial, spiral. We have all these different lines that go through this one area. And so you have femurs, which are ball and socket rotationals. And then we have the SI joint, which is rotation of the spinal around the hip, the actual iliacus around the spine itself. And then pubic symphysis in the front, which is just kind of trying to control like up and like side to side, left to right, and like keeping everything centered there. So there's just a lot going on. And that's why I think there's a lot of hip pain. Now, hip flexors. All right. So to get back into the whole issues of this, what this question is asking about, all of those things. Well, let's talk about the hip flexors. They tiny. Hip flexors are not the big muscles in this situation. They're the small muscles. They're the little hip flexors. And so these little muscles are fighting these big muscles constantly, as well as trying to stabilize and anti-rotation, and they're just doing a lot of work. So they wear out. We also don't do a lot of strengthening for the hip flexors. Most training, people start off, they don't do the small muscle groups, they do the big muscle groups. And when you do the big muscle groups, it makes the small muscle groups have to work harder, and you do get some level of workout there, but it also wears them out quicker. So we're a machine, moving parts. That's the thing that moves a lot and does a lot of different work. And there's just a lot of moving pieces in that area. That's why I think we have a lot of hip flexors problems. I do not think it's just because of sitting. I think it does have something to do with postural issues, but yeah. And this gets into the next question here, so we might as well jump into that one because talking about hamstrings is going to be similar. Octavia, next question, please.
Question 37. What is really going on with tight hamstrings in most people?
All right, so we get into that postural question, and we get into tight hamstrings. And hamstrings are an interesting muscle set because they do a lot of stabilization and balancing. And so remember, going all the way back to that proprioception thing I was talking about, that's why this was really important to talk about that early on, which is why I brought it up then. Hamstrings are doing, like I said, balance and stabilization, but we don't often think about them doing that. We think of them as big prime movers. They're not. Specifically in a seated position. Your hamstrings in a seated position are actually in contraction. They are eccentric. So they're in an eccentric action. And so they're thinking, how do I fight gravity? I control the pelvis. And so the hamstrings are trying to control pelvic tilt more often than they are trying to do motor skill when we're seated. And that's why hip flexors, not the seated issue. Hamstrings are the seated issue. The amount of seated positions that we are in as humans nowadays, that's a hamstring issue because it's trying to control pelvic tilt, focused on gravitational force and shearing force, which is rotational. All right, we have to remember we are moving in three-dimensional space all the time. The Earth is hurtling through space at some it's like thousands of miles per second. So, or 1,000 kilometers, a couple thousand kilometers a second. It's moving really, really fast. Relativity states, the only part of Einstein's theories that I actually like, our bodies are just relative to that, right? We're just on a rotational force metric and like, oh, okay, like if the Earth stopped right now, stop rotating, the crust of the earth would shear off so fast. As I understand it, you would have enough oxygen because the oxygen would go with the crust. It would dissipate over time. But you'd have enough oxygen in your lungs if you just held your breath, and would probably actually be able to take a big gasp of breath, even though this is going to happen so quickly. You would still be alive to the point where you looked back and saw the earth, like where you were, like you could watch everything go away. It's going to be hurtling. It's spinning so quickly that if it just stopped on a dime, it would shear the earth's crust clean off. It would all just go off in different directions. And you would just travel with the building you're in. Yeah, the walls would break and stuff, but like you would just go with it. So if you're not outside, you probably you wouldn't see anything. You would just feel a massive force. And then as deceleration occurred, it would be a whole bunch of bad stuff. But yeah, that would we're just moving really fast. You're moving really fast right now. Relatively, you're like, oh, I'm just seated down, Phil. I'm not doing any movement. But not according to your body. Your fascia system's like, what is happening to me? What is going on? Well, let me figure all this out. Thank you, fascial system. So the hamstrings in the seated position are controlling the pelvic tilt. And that's really where things go awry. This is why you should sit on your sits bones, because your sits bones are the origin point for the hamstrings. And they both come together. Now, here's the other funny thing about hamstrings. One hamstring crosses over the femoral line. The other one does not. Okay, so if you look at anatomy and physiology and you look at the picture, you're looking at the posterior view. So you're looking behind the leg. You're looking at the condyles of the knee. So you're looking at the very bottom of the knee, top of the knee on the back, right? You're looking at the top. And then you look at the bottom. There's a little crease line. The hamstring is attached below the joint. They help bend the knee. So they're on the bottom, below the knee, and the bottom epicondyle, so your tibia and fibula. And then they come up as two to one point known as your sits bone. The not ilio. I forget the name of it. Sits bone. But they both come up to this attachment site. One of them crosses over the femur. The other one does not. And so when we look at the hamstring lines, the important thing to keep in mind is one is capable of doing knee rotation. The other one isn't. The other one is doing contraction and flexion, eccentric, eccentric. The opposite is doing eccentric, eccentric, and a rotational value, which means it's stabilizing constantly. And so what your ankles are doing, your knees are doing, what your knees are doing, your hips are doing. So it also goes up the chain. That's why I say hamstrings do a lot more stabilization when we talk about it fascially and how force and vector work in the human system. And that is why we see a lot of quote unquote tight hamstrings in people, is because of what we're doing with the hamstrings comparatively to what we're not doing with the hamstrings. We often don't train them correctly. We don't focus on them. A lot of people focus on their glutes more than their hamstrings. A lot of people do straight linear action with the hamstrings and don't do any lengthening metric. They also do a lot of partial metrics. Hamstrings are very long, and so they actually don't end up training the whole hamstring. They only train partial rep. So if you're not fully extending and then pulling to a full flexion, you're not training the whole range of motion of that muscle, going all the way back to proprioception like we talked about earlier. So that's probably good enough for that one. Let's move on to the next question. Octavia, question number 38, please.
Question 38. Why does so much chronic pain present in the same predictable locations? Lower back, neck, shoulders.
This has to do with posture. It also has to do with repetitive action. And it also has to do with the fascial system. The things that can articulate the most and can articulate the most are typically where the machine is going to have the most issues. I'll say that again. The part of the machine that can articulate the most and do articulate the most are bound to have the most issues. Shoulders, neck, lower back. These are the things we use the most. Knees, that's the next one that goes on the list. How we use them matters. So if you're doing a repetitive action and that repetitive action is not done posturally correct, you're going to cause damage to the system. And You have to remember that repetitive action is often stagnant. Oh no, Phil, what are you talking about? Action's action. It's not stagnant. No, everything is an action. There's no such thing as inaction. Inaction is a descriptor, just like a push is a descriptor. I can describe a push, moving something away from me. I'm pushing something. My muscles are pulling. If I'm pushing something away from me with my palm, I'm typically contracting eccentric action of my tricep. I'm eccentric action, relaxation of my bicep. There's no push there. Those are both pulls. The tricep pulls the joint into flexion to simulate what's known as a push. Okay. Now, back to that inaction statement. The body, all the time, via the fascial system and your twitch reflex, is moving and is in constant movement. It's doing this because we, even when you're sitting, are in constant movement. This is why I like and hate the theory of relativity all at the same time. Because people don't realize that the theory of relativity is relative. The relation of movement in the human system is constant action. What force and vector am I experiencing? 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 How do I react to that force and vector? How do I react to that force? It's a constant equation, even when you're sleeping. So inaction is actually action. Even when your muscles are completely asleep, that non-REM sleep, completely out. Some people wake in this moment and become conscious, and we have this thing called sleep paralysis. There's still movement. Peristalsis, that autonomic nervous system. On the parasympathetic side, peristalsis. Peristalsis is digestion. Your muscles are squeezing. They're squeezing along. Peristalsis, squeezing along. Smooth columnar muscle, squeezing along. Your heart is still beating. There's still contraction. All right, you want to talk about not moving? Your heart stop? Because if your heart's beating, you're doing action. You're moving. The system works together. So there is no such thing as inaction. It's actually a principal idea of all humanity. You can never be in inaction. If you are in inaction, you are non-mortal. You have found mortality. That understanding, let me go back to the question just to make sure I'm not going too far afield here. Why does so much chronic pain present in the same predictable locations, lower back, neck, and shoulders? Okay, yeah, let me rein myself in a little bit. If there's no such thing as inaction and there's always action, going back to my previous statement, any part of the machine that articulates or can articulate the most will be the dysfunction of the machine. Neck, shoulders, like all of the joints, all the things. Now, inflammation plays a huge role in this too. I think there's a question coming up. We're going to get into that more, so I'm going to save it for that. But that is why that's why pain locations are predictable. We also have this thing called trigger points. I think there's another question I'm honestly going to save this for because trigger points are a misnomer. Everyone has trigger points. Trigger points that are being acted upon are the ones that become troublesome. When the system isn't lubricated correctly, when the nutrition value isn't correct, that's why we can predict these points, because as a machine, the places that articulate the most and can articulate the most are where you're going to find the most issue. It's honestly, I mean, maybe I should knock on wood on this one. It's amazing that we don't see more issues with the eyes, because they do a lot of work. So maybe they're just highly functional that way. But I've always found it interesting that the eyes don't have more issue on more people. It's an interesting thing because the eyes do a lot of work. Oh, the eyes do so much work. It's kind of honestly a fascinating machine structure, like the piece of the eyes, the piece of the machine there. Oof, yeah. Ask any ophthalmologist, like the eyes are crazy biomechanical structures. Yeah, on that one. Let's get moving on so I don't get too bogged down in all these questions. Next question, please.
Question 39. What is the difference between a trigger point and a tender point, and does that distinction matter clinically?
All right. So here is maybe like a little bit of a rant because we need to talk about this one. Trigger points. People don't really, even in the clinical setting, trigger points are misunderstood. Everyone has trigger points. You have them right now. They are points of nerve tissue that refer pain. And so when I press on the trigger point, if I press on the right nerve cluster, they will refer pain. These are also known as pressure points, NANI points, acupressure points, and acupuncture points. They all line up. We all have the same trigger points. Those are known as the major trigger points. You have 3 of them on your scapula that I can hit on anybody, and everyone's going to be like, oh, I feel that one. So that's what a trigger point is, a cluster of nerves that send referred pain. When I press on it, the pain spreads. And it's mappable. It is the same sensations on the majority of all humans. Now, there are some outliers. There's some people who are wired a little bit differently, and that's all cool and a very interesting side of study. But the majority of humans, if I press on a specific trigger point, a known trigger point, they will feel the pain go in a certain direction, and trigger points can spread in different directions, but they are mappable. They are predictable, actual referred pain sensations. So everyone has trigger points, and tender points can be around a trigger point. A trigger point can be tender. That could be because the fascial system is bound up around there. Maybe there's some calcification. Maybe there's an entrapment. Maybe there's an impingement. Maybe there's, let's have this conversation. There's this word called knots. The clinical term for a knot is what's known as an adhesion. Adhesion is clinically represented towards the muscle tissue, not the fascia. An adhesion is not always fascially, an adhesion is always fascially based, but might not be muscle based. But on the clinical definition, it's actually only muscle based. It's not fascially based. And this is where we have this whole thing with fascial research. This is what I talked about in the last episode. We really got to get better with the naming schemes. We really got to do some research and really come up with a proper vernacular so we can talk about these things correctly. But an adhesion, if you think about adhesion, so an adhesive, think about an adhesive, so a glue or some tape. Let's say you have 2 pieces of tape, and you take the adhesive side, the sticky side, and you place them towards each other. So what I want you to do with your fingers right now is just take your fingers and put them together, the insides of your fingers, the parts that bend. Let's say those are the sticky sides of the tape. Now wrap your index fingers around each other, and that is now an adhesion. So we've taken 2 of the sticky parts and we've stuck them together. You call that a knot. We call it a knot because you have to unbind them. So there's this thing called shearing force, which undoes adhesions. Adhesions will not come apart unless you provide a shearing force or rehydrate or separate them through stretching, which is also another shearing force. So just like you have tape and you got to peel the tape apart, you can there's many different, you can pull the tape apart, you can peel it apart, you can try to strum it apart, you can do all sorts of stuff to it. This is why palpation is one of the most important things in therapeutic bodywork, to know what to do with the adhesion you feel or what tissues you're feeling it in. So if it's in the muscle belly, or if it's in the muscle, let's put it that way, what fascial layer is it at? Epimysium, perimysium, endomysium, top of the muscle, inside of the muscle, or the lower angle of the muscle connected to the bone. That matters. When we talk about adhesion in the muscle, what's happening is the myelin sheath is wearing away. Well, the myelin sheath is part of the epimysium. The mysium, the fascial line, the nice glidey stuff, is wearing away. So the muscle tissue, the fibrils and spindles and bundles, which are extremely sticky, get stuck together. So if you look at a muscle, a live tissue muscle, if you scrape away the mysium, the myelin sheath of the muscle, which is made of fascia, if you get rid of that, that stuff underneath ridiculously sticky, like the stickiest stuff ever. That's how our muscles move. They have these things that ratchet on the muscle to move us. I'm blanking on some of the names and terminology right now, but it honestly would probably just be too much at this point. But so ATP, triphosphate, is what we burn to do mycelial action, to do ratcheting action. I can't think of the specific name. Right? It's really cool. Look it up. It's a fascinating process. You have these little arms that have these two little hooks, and they just kind of ratchet on things, and it happens very quickly. So when that fascial sheath wears away, then we get adhesion, a clinical adhesion in the muscle, which you refer to as a knot, because the two adhesive parts are stuck together. Once you break them apart and the fascia rehydrates, that's why therapeutic bodywork, we define the therapeutic side. Bodywork is manual manipulation of soft tissue. Therapeutic change is defined as blood innervation, hydration, or function of the tissue, increase of function of the tissue. What we're doing is we're breaking up that adhesive layer to allow that muscle to glide and slide again on the fascia. How far afield have I gone on this? Chronic pain presents. Nope, not that one. What is the difference between trigger point and tender point, and does that distinction matter clinically? Yeah. So here's the thing: it all matters clinically because everyone has trigger points, and they map to the pain sensation areas, referred pain. But so we have that adhesion in the muscle belly. That can be a trigger point. There could be a nerve cluster in there that's getting stuck, and so you can have. Everyone has a certain set of trigger points, but you can create a trigger point that's somewhere else, that's outside the normal map, because we have an adhesion that's acting on a nerve cluster that's sending referred pain. So you have to break up that adhesion to help that person to get rid of that referred pain sensation. And adhesions at the trigger point, adhesions that become a trigger point. So we talk about the hierarchy. First, we have wearing down of the fascial layer. Then we have adhesion of the tissue. Then we can actually create a trigger point when the nerve tissue, so going all the way back up to question 31, the one we started with, structural pain and neurological pain. When the nerve tissue gets incorporated into this, and then we all have a bad day. And then we can get referred pain from the trigger point, which is when it maps across. So we can then usually try to track things down. We know this through entrapment and impingement. Specifically when we talk about the numbness in the hand. So we have the brachial plexus and the Addison side of things. So we have, let's break it down to front or back of the shoulder line. So in through the chest line into the clavicle, or in through the back line past the top of the scapula to the cervical spine, so the top of the spine there. If we have numbness and tingling in the thumb, index, and middle finger, comparatively to the pinky or ring finger, pinky, ring, or middle finger comparatively to the thumb and index finger. Sometimes the middle gets incorporated on either side. That tells us which fascial trigger point line is being affected. So we can map the neurological system, and we have. And trigger point is when we have a site that hits the pain referred areas. That adhesion can progress by trapping more nerve tissue and then become another different trigger point. And then we can have these other trigger points called satellite points. So a trigger point used to be defined, or I think actually might still be defined, as being in the belly of the muscle. And then satellite, quote unquote, trigger points are at the attachment sites of the muscle. I really think trigger points, that definition at a clinical level, should really just be washed into nerve tissue when pressed that refers pain. It's referred, a trigger point is something that refers pain. That means we know that either there's an adhesion that's causing nerve tissue to be entrapped when it is outside the normal map, or it's on the normal map and can still be nerve tissue that is being enacted upon by an adhesion. So we need, this is where like body work doesn't really exist on a clinical level, really. So no one like me has ever really put our input in at a clinical level. So, hey, anybody out there who wants to sit down and really help, map this stuff out and do some research, I'd be happy to sit down with you and, get this stuff figured out. I know we have some research institutes out there, but like, if I can figure this out, we can get this figured out, and we just need better definitions for some of this stuff. Let's move on here. This is getting into being a long one. What do we got? Next question, please.
Question 40. How does posture actually affect pain and dysfunction? And how much does it matter compared to what people think?
Posture, going back to that, this one, I can make this one a little quick. The parts of the machine that have the most operation, right, or capacity for operation, articulation, I put it during that question. So the parts of the machine that have the most and do the most articulation, have the most opportunity to do the most articulation, are typically where we see the most wear and tear. Posture controls how we move. So mobility versus flexibility. It all wraps right around that proprioception conversation. So if I have poor posture, I'm going to use my mobility poorly, and I'm going to wear out the articulation point faster. Same thing with flexibility. On the flexibility side, if I have poor posture, I'm going to cause the flexibility to have to react differently. The coefficient of strength, length times volume times width, or length times length times volume times. Oh, why do I not remember the coefficient of strength? Doesn't matter. We'll get into it another time. My brain will catch up to me. If I have flexibility issues, they can be due to posture because the bone structure, let's talking about that pelvic tilt thing with the hamstrings. If the pelvic tilt is in a specific part and my hamstrings think they're in contraction, kind of control that pelvic tilt, but because the pelvic tilt is being acted upon by an articulation above it, maybe at the lumbar spine, then there's more work to be done. And so I can have pain because there's an overwork syndrome there. Posture is a big thing when it comes to pain and dysfunction, because if you have poor posture and you're pressing on a joint and there's a trigger point there, see, it all goes together. The human system's a complex process, but to just answer that, just summation on that one. Posture affects the mobility or flexibility side, which has an effect on the proprioception and the articulation pieces of the machine. And so it will cause the machine to either have to do A, more work, or B, overwork. So it causes like there's too much pressure on this area or too much pressure on another area, which gets into the inflammation conversation, which I do believe is coming up in a question here. When we have places that are not articulating correctly, then we get inflammation. Inflammation, in my personal opinion, is the precursor to about 70% of all disease. So that's that one. And we'll answer this one a little bit further yet, but that's a good start for it. Next question, please.
Question 41. What does the research say about foam rolling and self-myofascial release?
I'm going to tell you what my research says, because I don't think we have any great actual research on this, or people, not enough that I would say like, oh, here's this really great data set. So this is going to be a little anecdotal, and hopefully everybody's okay with that. But anecdotally, I can tell you foam rolling doesn't do anything. Honestly, the research we do have says that you need to foam roll every 24 hours, or in a 24-hour window, 24 to 36, depending on the person, to have a therapeutic change, because compression of the tissue is just seen as that. It's seen as compression of the tissue. There's no intention driving that. Now, if you get really good at foam rolling, you can probably do, some good therapeutic work there, but it's just like stretching. Compression of tissue is just like stretching tissue. The muscle responds to it in the same way. Proprioception responds to it in the same way. The fascial system responds to it in the same way. This is all the same conversation. So when I compress the tissue, it's responding to a force. When I stretch the tissue, it's responding to a force. Foam rolling, you need to be sitting on the spot long enough to get it to react, just like a stretch. The fascial system must be... Foam rolling the muscle doesn't do much. It's better to try to do it fascially, and fascial foam rolling isn't something that gets taught a lot. Most foam rolling is taught by just the compression model, which is the massage model, which is the kinesthetic model, which is the broken model. And so self-myofascial release, you need to be following myofascial rules: fascial engagement, 3 points of contact, isolation and separation. So there's these rules that you really have to go to at a clinical level to, that's what body work. That's why I get paid the money I get paid to do the things I do. That's why I have the effect I have on people, therapeutically. There's a set parameter and protocol that has to be followed to get a better response there. So that's why One principle, at a principle level, the tissue must be addressed every 24 to 36 hours with foam rolling. Myofascial release, if you're doing it correctly, that's the question, are you doing it correctly, will have a more effective reaction time, but I'm going to say that's still a 48-hour window because it's really hard for us to do our own myofascial work. I get a 72-hour window just in my own body work, right? Like, so I'm a trained practitioner and I need your body to have 72 hours to respond to what I did. Our fascial system is much different than an animal's. So let's talk about cats and dogs for a second. Cats and dogs, they react to pressure, compression, lengthening, or strengthening much differently than we do. Their fascial system programs it right in. That's why cats have timers. When I worked on cats, I'd bring your cats and I'll work on them. I'm allergic to dogs, sorry. But working on cats, they have a timer. So it's a window that we can make some corrections and change until they're like, whoa, too many things. I gotta get this on our, because cats they're part of their survival is their agility and fast twitch muscle. You start messing with that, they start going, whoa, too much, kid, back down. And then they get mad at you or they walk away. They also, that's when they stretch and when their tails do different things. They're reprogramming their fascia. They have much more control over their fascia than we do. Dogs, similar, but their survival depends on some of that as well, but they respond differently, so they'll shake their jowls. A lot of what happens with a dog happens in that prefrontal cortex and the ocular cortex response. I'm not a neurological veterinarian or anything like that, but what they're doing with their mouth matters, right? Their cooling system. So they'll shake their jowls. That tells you, oh, they've reset their fascia. They do a long stretch. They do they've reset their fascia. Different yelps from a dog tells you like different things have happened. Cats, different hisses, meows, the way they flick their tail. So their fascia system is part of their operation, unlike ours, where we kind of train it and then we have to wait for it to respond. Humans have to sleep to have their fascia reset. So that's part of the foam rolling and myofascial, self-myofascial thing too. So we do know clinically that DRS response, the sleep state, the oxidative stress repair, fascial reprogramming, that happens during sleep. So that has to happen. We know that clinically, that during the research set. So that's probably the best way to answer that one. Next one is about some breathing mechanics, which will have something to do with this as well. Question number 42, please.
Question 42. How do breathing mechanics affect musculoskeletal function?
So breathing mechanics are a timer for us. It also controls blood oxygen level, but it also goes back to that parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. So all meditation, not to get in that right now, I did a whole episode on meditation. If you want to go back and learn everything you would need to know about meditation, go back to the meditation episode with Cassie. Thank you, Cassie, for being on that episode with me. Learn a ton about meditation there and why breathing is so important. Here's the breakdown real quick. Meditation is awareness of breath. Breath is the only part of that autonomous nervous system that we can control. We can actually do it on the actual controlled side of things. If you're not thinking about your breathing, it's in the autonomic nervous system, and that is controlled by parasympathetic, sympathetic. In sympathetic, your breathing will elevate. In parasympathetic, it will slow down. But we can take it out of the autonomic nervous system, and we can actually have direct control of it. So that's why breathing is so important, is that you can help control the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic, sympathetic, by taking control of your breathing, because if you're not controlling your breathing, it's controlling it. So that's the best way. But I would say if you really want to know more about that one, like the deep dive we did, again, Cassie and I did on meditation. I forget what episode that is, but that would be, if you really, there's some good pieces in there to learn about that one. Let's move on here because I'd like to finish up this section. Sorry about the interruption, but I want to tell you about the course that I released recently. If you're interested in self-awareness or have heard anything ever about manifestation, I highly recommend checking out manifestationstatecraft.com. It's the in-between between Hustlecraft and that wishful thinking that doesn't really work. You can hustle all day long and get nowhere, and you can wish, and also get nowhere. But if you learn the skills that I talk about in the course, you can find the middle ground there and turn your hustle and effort into results, and turn that wishful thinking and imagination into the creation of your dreams. So make your imagination become reality at manifestationstatecraft.com. You can use code STOIC to get $50 off the full course, or just check out the free preview and see if you like it. Hope you check it out, manifestationstatecraft.com. Next question.
Question 43. What is the diaphragm's role beyond breathing, and why do you address it so often?
All right, cool. So I wanted to combine these two questions kind of. So we talked about the meditation side of things, and now we're going to talk about how the diaphragm really matters here. And this one is super important for postnatal. So anyone out there post-pregnancy, get your diaphragm fixed up. Couple things that happen for women post-pregnancy. The abdominal wall will go up onto the ribcage wall because you had to make room for the baby and all your organs and stuff. If that abdominal fascial sheath lining is not removed from the being stuck to on top of the abdominal wall, it's going to affect your breathing pattern. If it's affecting your breathing pattern, it's affecting the autonomous nervous system, rest, digest, fight or flight. The diaphragm, same thing. Shallow breathing. If you are someone who shallows breathing, or if you're post-pregnancy and you're shallow breathing, it means your proprioception of your diaphragm is not working correctly. You're in a short range of motion. Your ROM, your flexibility of the diaphragm, is in a short range of motion. The proprioception probably needs to be fixed. So when we talk about musculoskeletal function, if the diaphragm, now this gets into a little bit of traditional Chinese medicine, and even a little bit more farther afield when we get into Shaolin training, we talk about Qigong practices. The triple burner, the 3 dantians, lower, middle, and upper. Lower dantians about 2 to 3 fingers breadth below the navel and 3 fingers back into the central body. The solar plexus is what most people are familiar with when we talk about the middle dantian, and the upper dantian is the throat point. So when we talk about the 3 dantians and triple burners, these are the ballast systems of the body. I can use air as a ballast. And so if I breathe into my lung tissue and I contract using the pressure in the lungs. Oh, here now we're getting into some things. The pressure in the lungs. Not that we talk about belly breathing. Belly breathing is the contraction or relaxation and the pushing the diaphragm down, which makes the belly rise up. All right. And I can contract or relax that. That's belly breathing. That's an awareness, an intentional piece. What's occurring there is the volume of oxygen being pulled into the lung tissue and the contraction state of the deep core fascia. This allows me to create a ballast. And that ballast can then be used as a bracing point for the fascial system to vector forces. And that gets into martial arts and stuff and how force moves. And it's part of athletic training. Lifting, you need to learn how to breathe correctly. So yeah, if your diaphragm's not working correctly, you can't create your ballast structure. Your fascial system can't brace point correctly. It can't. All sorts of different things. If you're shallow breathing, your endocrine system might respond differently. So breathing is really important, apparently. Who knew breathing is so freaking important? But yeah, if you have if your breathing mechanics are off, you're going to have musculoskeletal function dysfunction. And if your diaphragm isn't working correctly, it's going to throw that off with it. So it's like a progression sleeve. Diaphragm not working correctly, breathing pattern not working correctly, dysfunction, not just musculoskeletal dysfunction. It's probably going to be some other dysfunction as well. Blood oxygen, like all sorts of different stuff. And that's why now the people that I work, the populace that I do the most work on that one is post-pregnancy. That's like one of my number one things we need to do for women post-pregnancy. I'm going to take the second to say, ladies, I'm sorry, there's no post-pregnancy care in America. It doesn't exist. Post-pregnancy care we can't even apologize for it because it literally doesn't exist. So the only thing we can apologize for is that it doesn't exist. I'm sorry. I do my best. I'm only a solo practitioner. If you're not in the area around me, in Montgomeryville, Pennsylvania. If you're not within driving distance to get to me, to see me as a practitioner, try to find a practitioner that can help you. Go back. You know what? Actually, go back and listen to the episode I did with Liz from Newborn Families LLC. Shout out to them. And also shout out to Orchard Hill Chiropractic, which is the chiropractor, Dr. Leslie Gearhart, that I refer everyone I know who's doing pregnancy stuff. If you don't have resources like that, go back to that episode and listen to that, because that episode has a ton of information as well as places to look to get resources and to find practitioners such as myself, such as Liz, and such as Dr. Leslie, who can help you through your pregnancy and post. I do a lot more of the post care. And that's a big thing that I wish, if someone's certified in prenatal massage, they're just there to touch you nicely and get you through, maybe some relaxation stuff. But we do need a lot more post care that helps with diaphragmatic breathing. Talking about how the bones reset after pregnancy with having produced so much progesterone, and the actual joint material, the myelin sheath there relaxing, and so my hierarchy of things: acute care, desensitization, balance, stabilization, strengthening, right? So we should be doing all that for post-pregnancy. So again, I'm sorry that care doesn't exist. Try to find someone in your area if you're not in mine, and listen to that episode with Liz to get some more resources there. Let's get into, I think we got 2 more. Is it 2 more? I think it's 2 more yet here, and then we can wrap up this section. Question 44.
Question 44. How does sleep affect tissue recovery and pain perception?
All right, so here's a so I've been waiting for this one, and the next one too, but I've been waiting for this one. So here we go. What actually happens when you sleep? I'm so excited. Here, 1 second. I've been talking too much. My throat's getting dry. All right. Let's talk about what happens when you really sleep. What really happens? You go to bed. You have this kind of liminal part where you're kind of like, maybe a little daydreamy, a little flighty, and you're trying to wind down, and then all of a sudden you dip off into sleep. You're in the brainwave patterns where your body is now starting to do some processes, some restorative processes start to occur. As those restorative processes start to occur, there's a couple things. We balance out the endocrine system. We start to find homeostasis. A lot of healing happens at the tissue level. We're resetting and balancing out the fascial system. We are incorporating any training, inflammation sets that has happened. All this stuff. Your brain is doing its psychological things. And I'm sure there's some things happening as well, spiritual on the spiritual health side, on the spiritual health body. When we dip into REM sleep, random eye movement sleep, dreaming states, there's a fascial programming situation happening there. We are running through programs of movement. We are using imagination structure. So there's some healing aspects there. Then we have this thing called non-REM sleep, delta brainwave pattern, 0 to 4 hertz on the Hertzian scale. This is when we're doing oxidative stress repair, DNA and RNA repair specifically. How does sleep affect tissue recovery and pain? Is it perception? If you're not sleeping and getting into that non-REM sleep, you are not doing oxidative stress repair, which means you have more inflammation in the body than your body is able to deal with. So we're really talking about an inflammation marker set. Inflammation, precursor, in my personal opinion, to 70% of all disease. Inflammation is also a huge part of pain sensation. If the system is swollen, sore tender. Think about sore tender. A sore tender muscle is a swollen muscle because you've damaged it. You did some good lifting. You got your swole on. You got your pump. And now the muscle has torn itself a little bit. It needs to get repaired. We got to do our protein synthesis, our RSK signaling. We got to patch the muscle up, make it bigger, make it stronger. Progressive overload and all that good stuff. All the training methodologies and programs out there. It needs to inflame itself to do that. Something not a lot of people know, inflammation is really good for you. That's actually the only way you heal. Your inflammation system can become overwhelmed and the histamine response markers can not work correctly, and inflammation becomes stagnant or static, and that can cause damage. The first thing that happens anytime we damage ourselves in any way, or the body needs to respond to something by providing it a set of building blocks to do something is through histamine, through inflammation. Two master chemical regulators there, glutathione and always get the other one, not bromelain. It's typically taken with bromelain. It'll come to me. Quercetin. So glutathione and quercetin, those two response structures are histamine response channel markers. And what happens is the body uses the histamine response factor to send inflammation to areas, but it's not just sending nothing. It's not just sending liquid water. It's sending vitamin E, vitamin C. It's sending all of the building blocks, all the amino acids and chains, and it's sending all of that to go do the stuff it needs to go do. It's sending zinc when we're ill because zinc kills things and goes, here's some zinc. Get rid of whatever that foreign invader is. It's a system. It's a biomechanical system. It's doing things. Our sleep cycles help control our Krebs cycle. Our Krebs cycle is our inflammation response cycle, the citric acid cycle. Our sleep cycles help control our hormonal cycles, which help control. So sleep is just so important. It's like the number one important thing you can be doing, getting good quality sleep. And so it helps with tissue recovery. It's the time we do tissue recovery. And also it can help with the inflammation responses so that inflammation doesn't become stagnant or stuck. And what it does, it becomes a low-grade caustic acid. So if I have an inflammation response, inflammation goes out to a certain part of the body to help drop off. It does twofold. It's almost like a supply. It's like a supply line. It's driving the truck out to drop off the new materials at the construction site and picking up all the trash from the construction site and getting that out of there. And so the inflammation response brings in the new good stuff and takes out the bad stuff, old bad stuff. So it's doing double duty. Well, if it just takes the new good stuff and it doesn't pick up the old bad stuff and just kind of hangs out there, well, that old bad stuff will then start to degrade the new good stuff. And then we cause damage. And that's why we have these things called autoimmune diseases, which are all inflammation based. It's uncontrolled inflammation in the body. And so when we have these uncontrolled inflammation markers, that causes damage because we're just leaving essentially, I won't call it toxic waste, but like use that as like kind of like your mental image there of just this bad stuff that's just like, it's just rotting and not doing us any good. And then it backs up the system and then we can't drop off the good new material to heal the issue. And so it just keeps happening recursively. And that's why sleep is so important for tissue repair and also for stopping some pain function, right? Anything that's pain function wise based on inflammation, swelling and acting on nerve tissue or damaging nerve tissue because there's swelling on it. That's why or how. Last question of this section, question 45, please.
Question 45. What is the relationship between the gut and chronic musculoskeletal issues?
You're right. I don't have enough time to go over this one. It should be its own episode. I eventually have to do it. I did get into it a little bit on the supplement episode. If you haven't seen that one, go back and check that one out. Our gut biome controls part of our endocrine system through the gut-brain axiom. You are what you eat, people. You are what you eat. Not only are you what you eat. All right, let's do it this way. Oh, man. All right, here we go. I've said some crazy things, right? I've said inaction isn't a thing. We're always in action. I've said, we're always constantly in motion, spinning around. Your gut biome is not yours. It's not even inside of you. Sorry, remember, pressurized system. From esophagus to back end, you're a donut. And that tissue is yours, but it's no different than your skin. It's externally facing. And so everything, you're just a giant donut and everything in there is externally facing. But yes, it is quote unquote on the inside of you. Because it's externally facing, it's no different than your skin, right? Like this is outside world and this is me. However you want to think about that. So it's not yours, technically. Like the outside world's not mine. There's a barrier. There's more. There's three barriers actually. I don't want to get into all that, but there's an energetic barrier via the bioelectrical field. But let's think about it this way: just like there's stuff hanging out on your skin, there's stuff hanging out in your gut. Some can be very beneficial. These are known as probiotics. Pro meaning beneficial or good in the sense like better, good for the system, biotic bacteria. Probiotics release things, not just, they break down things and they release things. So we give them foodstuffs, which sometimes we give them foodstuffs. Sometimes we just give them chemical nonsense, which they get mad about, which is why you are what you eat. If you're just eating chemical crap food, then you're going to feel like crap because your probiotics, your good gut biome bacteria is not going to do anything. Bad bacteria is going to take over, and fungus and other nasty stuff. But you eat something that goes in, and the good bacteria go, oh, hey, human, thank you. I need this fiber, which is my meal. That's what prebiotic is, known as fiber. Good bacteria feed on fiber. So they go, oh, cool. I get fiber, you get this. I get fiber, you get this. I get fiber, you get this. And it gives us all our nutrients. They help break things down. And they help give us stuff. They also produce other byproducts. So instead of our system having to do it, they do it for us. And they're like, oh, hey, I get this, you get this. And we go, oh, cool, thanks. I need that to do this chemical reaction to make this system thing happen, like melatonin response structure, or maybe create cortisol, or create dopamine, or create 25-hydroxy or 125-hydroxy vitamin D. Like, they're helping us do all the things through the nutritional values of the things that we give them. So stop giving them shit. Sorry. Like, stop giving them bad stuff. Eat better. Take care of your body. Help your gut bacteria. They're like your own little pets. There's trillions of them. They're just hanging out. Hopefully you don't get grossed out by that, but that's how that works. So what is the relationship between the gut and the chronic musculoskeletal issues? If you're not getting proper nutrition because your gut biome is bad, feel bad. If you're not getting appropriate things to help with the histamine response markers, inflammation control, because your gut biome is not able to help you with that, bad. If your gut biome isn't helping you produce proper cortisol or dopamine or serotonin levels or even norepinephrine levels through the gut-brain axiom and providing you those other building blocks and pieces, bad. You are what you eat. You're also what your gut biome wants to give you. So, that's why chronic gut inflammation is really bad. Leaky gut syndrome and IBS. And, we got to help the gut bacteria. We got to help the system help us. We are a symbiotic system. It's like a Simcoat. Like again, it's inside of us, quote unquote, but it's externally facing. And so we need to treat it like that. So we know, like, oh, just like I was talking about the inflammation and like sits around, you can think of it like, oh, good, new, awesome, building material, and then just trash and filth and nonsense. Same thing. If I put in good, clean, awesome stuff and help it get rid of the bad, clean itself up, constant, nice, systematic process, have less musculoskeletal issues. This also happens with like your body. Yes, your stomach acid breaks things down, but the gut lining is what does the absorption, right? So protein absorption. We're doing all these processes. The whole chemical system is based on all this. So that is the relationship between the gut and the chronic musculoskeletal system. There's a lot of different functions there. Gut-brain axiom, which also helps with mind-body connection too. So, all right. So that should do it for episode number 2 of our 100-question deep dive. That section was anatomy, physiology, and pain sciences. That was question 31 through 45. Hopefully you learned something on that one. There was a lot there. We covered a lot. Next section is functional training and the Stoic Bodywork methods, when I start to talk about some of the stuff that I've come up with and stuff that we do on a regular basis here at Stoic Bodywork. But thank you for listening. Check out purebulk.com to get any supplements. They will take care of any of your supplement needs. I've been using them for years. They're amazing. Quality is off the charts. And just their customer service is fantastic. The people over there. Shout out to the whole team over at PureBulk. Use code StoicBodywork15 to get 15% off your first order, or use Stoic Bodywork to get 10% off any order after that. Again, amazing quality and amazing people. Shop at purebulk.com. Make sure you check out manifestationstatecraft.com. Use code STOIC to get $50 off the course. Check out the free first section just to see if you like it. It's free. You can check out the whole first module, see what you think. And also make sure if you heard anything in the podcast, this episode, about sleep, and you're like, man, I really wish I got better sleep, please go over to bodywork.com/stoic sleep, all one word, STOIC SLEEP. And grab a jar of Stoic Sleep today. You can use code STOIC to get $5 off your first jar. Thank you. I'll catch you on the next one when we deep dive into the next set of questions, which is going to be, again, functional training and the Stoic methods. See you there.